Okay.
Thank you for joining us for the AgileanIT webinar, Linking IT Transformation to Business Model and Strategy. In this webinar, you will learn how to develop and internally communicate your business and competitive strategy using business model and process visualization tools and techniques, understand how to best use lean value stream mapping and value chain analysis to identify key transformation initiatives and target speed and quality metrics to show the direct impact on value delivered to key customers and stakeholders, and be able to link your scaled, agile, safe, and lean transformation initiative and the Agile Trains and Scrum team's backlogs to the most valuable and lowest risk prioritized opportunities that can directly impact value delivered to customers. This webinar is sponsored by AgileanIT, which is a division of Nori Associates, founded in 2001 as an international business and information technology management consultancy with a proven track record of helping organizations achieve measurable business and IT improvements and transformations through many of our service offerings. Our three panelists today are Hamid Nori, who is the Managing Principal for AgileanIT and NAI. Hamid was responsible for strategic business and IT consulting offerings and delivery in Americas and Asia Pacific for Gartner, and has over 20 years experience in business and IT strategic planning, visualization, business and IT transformation, and emerging digital technologies. Our next panelist, Dan Madison, is AgileanIT's lean transformation coach who has over 20 years of experience in lean value stream mapping and analysis, process mapping, process metrics, process management, and process redesign. He is the author of a highly successful and frequently cited book, Process Mapping, Process Improvement, and Process Management, which is also one of the highest ranked books on Amazon on this topic. And our third panelist is AgileanIT's managing partner, Prakash Veditapur, with over 20 years experience in engineering leadership, product development, organizational change management, and management consulting. He led Cisco's highly successful Lean and Agile Transformation Initiative between 2012 and 2017, and was responsible for the on-time development and delivery of Cisco's next-generation IP platforms and system offerings. To kick off today's webinar, I'm going to turn it over to Hamid Nori, and we'll circle back for our question and answer session at the end. Please don't hesitate to use our chat function in the control panel to post your questions or if you need help during the webinar. Hamid?
Well, good morning. Thank you very much, Stephanie, for the introduction. And thank you all for joining. Apologies for the initial technical difficulties to get the process started. I'm very pleased to be with you and my colleagues today. I have two of our thought leaders on the subject that we'll be covering together with us today. And we hope to spend the next hour kind of sharing with you our experience, what we observe in the marketplace, and what we found to be like the current trend that affects organizations of all sizes. The agenda is on the screen at the moment. As you can see, we will start with talking about the broader trend that we see with respect to business and digital transformation. This is a very common initiative that we find that over 65% of organizations who are looking at planning and are being impacted by the pace and nature of changes that are going on in the industry today. We'll talk about a concept that has actually been very successfully used by a number of organizations around the world to be able to quickly articulate the business direction and the business model, a concept referred to as business model canvas. And we'll talk about the potential utility of such tools in being able to talk about and build consensus around the direction of the organization. We'll then move on to the other key concepts around how to link the strategy to specific actions that could be taken for the organization with respect to process, with respect to organization, and finally the technology opportunity. Our goal is to share with you as much as we can about the best practices that we have observed in working with clients over the last 10 to 15 years. So that's our goal for the next hour together. So let me go ahead and get us started on that task. This morning, we're in a beautiful plug-and-play facility, the Entrepreneurial Incubator in Sunnyvale, California, and we're very pleased to have you with us. And we want to start by talking about business transformation. What does it mean, and why do we see that terminology very often these days across so many organizations? What we find almost invariably is that everyone who talks about transformation to some degree is referring to taking advantage of the digital transformation opportunities that are going on around us. And being able to master the software engineering discipline has become a critical success factor for every industry. So it is what we refer to as the backbone of being able to compete effectively in the future. And the question is, how do I take advantage of tools to be able to improve process and improve outcome and compete effectively in my industry? That is the goal for most organizations who are taking on initiatives like this. What it turns out, IT has become or is the most difficult challenge to overcome. And for many CIOs who we have been working with over the last 10 or 15 years, the primary challenge has always been to be able to communicate the alignment and the utility of IT within the organization. And the task has now become so much more difficult because the future of the company now depends on your success in being able to apply these digital technologies. So it's now more about being able to overcome barriers through digital transformation, managing your technical debt as you're developing these kind of solutions and experimenting with new business models, and being able to enable the organization through decentralizing transformation. Those are the key challenges. In essence, the CIOs who used to always focus on technology opportunities and the chief marketing officers who always used to focus on the customer experience have now have to come together and be able to effectively work together to create these new opportunities and new models for the organization to thrive and succeed. So what do we mean by holistic digital transformation? It's the concept of being able to truly connect your vision of what can be done with your company and your business model with that of successfully executing and delivering on an incremental basis. This is the challenge that everyone is trying to master. Making the business be able to think and innovate faster or fail faster. That may seem like an odd concept, but the idea is that there are no known formulas out there where you actually assign a team for the next 2 weeks or next month or next year and come out the other end with the right ideas. It's all about being able to quickly get around your vision and your opportunities and be able to test new ideas and be able to put those ideas to an experiment, hypothesize, see if it works. If it works, build on it, otherwise pivot and start with new experimentation. That is the key to success going forward. So being able to experiment with these ideas, being able to transform your legacy silo functions to, in essence, cooperate together to be able to better give and deliver the customer experience that are needed for your supply chain, your suppliers and partners, your employees, as well as your customer becomes a critical success factor going forward. And that will be the focus of our discussion today. The next chart on slide 10 is really about what we see as common scenarios. Over 50% of the projects that we've observed actually end up in failure, and failure being defined as being canceled or being put to the side because they're not producing fast enough the kind of results that are needed. So a common set of issues that we observe very often is that requirements are not well understood. There's an expectation that the big upfront plan that comes up in an estimate can be accurate. It can actually define the steps for the next 3 years. It can produce outcomes that actually meets the business needs. Those are assumptions that were a lot more possible to address maybe 5 to 10 years ago. With the pace of change today, it's become almost impractical and impossible to plan that far out in the future. So being able to understand how to experiment and how to deliver value more incrementally has become a critical success factor. To the right of this graphic, you'll notice that the cone of uncertainty. We've been involved with forensic assessments of over probably 20 projects over the last 15 years, anywhere between $50 million up to $400 million in investments. And in many cases, what we have found is that the industry change or the events that has surrounded the organization within 6 months or 18 months into the project has caused the project to become completely irrelevant and has caused it eventually to lose support. Being able to overcome those kind of issues, and managing risk and having visibility to risk becomes a critical success factor. Page 11 speaks to the framework that we believe can work successfully for many organizations who are thinking about and trying to go after this topic. How do I connect my business and digital transformation strategy with my real underground effort around agile teams who are working on specific opportunities? To us, it's very important to be able to combine top-down planning and bottoms-up planning, and start by being able to articulate and communicate the business model and the business strategy. That is a success factor, meaning the transparency and visibility into what opportunities exist and how do we capture those opportunities is very critical. Also, we want to be able to translate that business model into a specific action. And the way we want to go around doing that is by focusing on all of the processes that deliver value to your key customers. Customers, of course, are external customers, but it also should include internal employees who need to be able to respond and be able to deliver those services. And of course, partners. Partners are critical to your success. We want to be able to take the business model, take it down to the specific business processes and value streams that deliver value, and then combine that with specific agile teams and agile technology initiatives that can help deliver those opportunities. We refer to this model as the lean digital enterprise, and that's the concept that we'll review with you. On page 12, these are the type of questions that we want to be able to answer. I'm not going to read these to you, but in essence, the idea is to make sure that the senior leadership team and the strategy planning team is aware of value proposition that the company currently delivers, how it's being attacked by the current competitors and emerging competitors, and how you can best respond by determining other values that you can create for the same customer or adjacent markets. Being able to understand your competitive position and your differentiators in the market is the starting point for that discussion. Being able to capture that and capitalize on those opportunities becomes the foundation for the business strategy. To us, the two big challenges that every organization has to master is to reduce complexity and increase transparency and visibility. How you do that is really the key challenge that we want to be able to talk to. Next page gives you actually a specific model, page 13. It speaks to the business model canvas. This is actually coming from one of our colleagues out of Switzerland that in essence took the idea of a business strategy and broke it down into 9 key elements that define strategy and communicate strategy. And via this model, you're able to quickly understand your position and your capabilities and your competitive differentiators in the marketplace, and start to experiment by changing potentially the channels, the cost structures, the partnerships, and be able to potentially disrupt the value chains and your industry's offerings through this innovative and disruptive thinking. The business canvas, the business model canvas, is an opportunity to be able to communicate that to the rest of the organization very clearly and very easily and in a visual form, and marrying that up to specific metrics about what defines success is the most important aspect of this discussion. This is an example on page 14 of how a team actually does this process. Specifically, it's not about somebody sitting in an ivory tower doing this. It's really putting the people who know most about your industry and your business in a room and starting to brainstorm about what the opportunities are, who the competitors are, what can we do to change some dynamic about our cost structure or about our value that we have delivered to a particular customer, or maybe other customers that are in adjacent vertical industry that you're a part of. All of these become part of what we call an agile approach to strategic planning. Very important part of achieving success in today's environment. The next step in the process is what we refer to as understanding and exploiting the innovation opportunities. So here, almost every organization has to evaluate what is coming down the pike with respect to these key technologies that will certainly have an impact on your industry and your business. Machine learning, big data analytics, chatbots, blockchain, having SaaS and cloud solutions, taking advantage of a digital platform and API economy and a microservices architecture, immersive experiences, Internet of Things, robotic process automation. These are key technologies. And we believe by understanding and starting to explore these areas, you will find ways to exponentially increase the value that you deliver to your clientele. So in essence, Once we have done that and been able to identify the business model and the key strategic opportunities for the organization, and then explored what opportunities exist and what's possible, the next task is to translate that to a specific action you can take and how you can increase the value to your existing and potential future clientele. Here, we find that ideas that have been in the works for the last almost two decades or so are very useful. The ideas of a lean organization that really understands how to deliver value by removing waste from any process that delivers value to the client. This process starts by understanding who the customer is, defining the user persona, and what value they perceive and receive from you, and how they can expand on that particular set of values. Dan, actually one of my colleagues who will actually speak in a few minutes here, will take us through how to define those value streams and how to define how to improve and actually show direct impact on business performance. This is the steps that we usually recommend in the process. That's on page 17. In essence, it starts by being able to define the specific customer profile, being able to understand and document the value proposition that individual or set of customers receive from you, and start to map new objectives and charters for how value is delivered. It's important that you start by understanding how the process is performing today, and you do that by looking at specific metrics that Dan will get into in detail. And once we understand how we are performing against the specific set of capabilities we have, we can start to think about innovation, both in terms of digital technologies that can help change the value proposition, as well as start to prioritize what can be changed or should be changed with respect to process, organization, and key technology opportunities. On page 18, what you see is the very common scenario where we try to very hard as an organization to keep the process together and deliver despite all odds. When we observe these kind of issues like complexity and too many workarounds, circumventing procedures that you have, excessive information exchange between systems and redundancies, data quality issues, high ratio of quality checks that you have, to us, that's all indicators of a need to take a look at the process and the value streams. And that's a very important part of achieving the kind of outcomes that are needed to compete in the new world that we have now. The next page gets into the definition of what we mean by lean digital enterprise. It gets into specifically the concept of reducing waste. That's all about value stream mapping. How we do that is what we're going to talk about next. Once we start to remove waste, we start to have optimal flow. Creating flow will allow us to also continue to eliminate more waste, and we can start to look for applying digital technologies to optimize the outcomes. To us, the combination of optimizing the technology opportunities and eliminating waste will give you the highest chance to compete successfully in your industry. So at this point, I'm going to actually transition to Dan. This last chart on page 20 speaks to the fact that having continuous flow is really a critical success factor for almost any industry. And if you use an example of pharmaceutical distribution to reflect that point, and for us, the key message that I want to leave you with is being able to anticipate how you can actually drive higher value, both upstream and downstream, in the processes that serve the customer by analyzing what does the customer do and what pains they have that you could go after and what benefits you could actually be able to start to introduce to them. So with that, I'm going to ask Dan. Dan, please start our discussion around the value stream, if you would.
Thank you, Hamid. Here at slide 21, what we're looking at is a very straightforward and simple definition of what a value stream is. Another definition would be it's some combination of steps that provide a good or a service to a customer. If we were to prioritize which customers are really important, we would start with the external customer, the one who, if you're in a private sector organization, basically where you get your revenue. If you're in a public sector organization, the customer is the folks who receive your services. What you have here on slide 22 is a schematic of what a value stream can look like. And as you can see, the processes go from left to right. We've got a customer, in this case, that starts the process. and then it moves on to the next steps. The element of a value stream that I think is really important are the data boxes that go under each step. And we're going to talk about what can go into those data boxes. So this is the basic template that you start with. So what kind of data can we capture under each of these process steps? Well, we can capture a lot of different kinds of data. There are two kinds of data that we're, I guess, prioritize in terms of what's most important. One would be time. So we slice and dice time in a variety of definitions. One is processing time, and this is basically doing the work of the step. So whenever someone starts on that and continues to work on it, of the work of the step, they're doing processing time. Lead time is how long it takes from the beginning of the process step to the end of it. So lead time is going to include the total amount of time at the step, which would be processing time, and then processing time, we're saying how long would it be if you were not interrupted? Well, how often does that happen? So processing time would include the wait time where you're answering or addressing an interruption, a telephone call, someone coming in and talking to you. So a very simple formula is lead time equals processing time plus wait time. Inventory, very simple definition of this. This is the work that you have not gotten to yet. Your inventory could sit in the computer, it could be paper on your desk, or whatever. What we're interested in is how long it was it in inventory. Now we get into quality metrics. In service organizations, or when we're dealing with information, the two criteria that we look at are, is it complete and is it accurate? And ideally, it would be 100% complete and 100% accurate. Next data item could be what information technology we're using, what system we're using. Demand rate. Demand rate is the expectation that the customer has for how long they want it to take to get to receive the product or service. And you're going to see that in the next slide when we get into an actual case. Batching, I think you know what that is. We do a whole bunch of the same work at one time. In Lean, we basically don't like batching because what it's doing is creating wait time. And also, we can make an error through the entire batch. So there's a variety of reasons that we don't like batching. I would add another data point here, which would be the batch frequency. How often do we do the batch? The next one is the number of people that are available to do the process step. So that lets us know, how many bodies do we have when the work comes in for that particular step. Setup time is an interesting thing. It's the work that precedes the work of the step. Actually, it precedes processing time. So if you were doing a report, let's say the first thing you needed to do was to go to a file cabinet, pull a file, come back to your office, load a program, and scroll to a page, and now you're ready to do the report. So getting the file, loading a program, scrolling is all the work that precedes the work of doing the report. So you're preparing to do the report, which, by the way, is a non-value added step. Available time, this is an accordion in most office and service environments. And it's basically saying, for this process step, how much time do you carve out of your day to do the work of the step? And this can change by priorities, by whether you like to do the work or not, what your workload is, etc. And then the last item is reliability, and that's the reliability of the IT system. What's its uptime? So now we're going into an actual case study here. What you're looking at is what we call the customer report card. And this is how we create it. We basically go to the customer and ask them these questions. What is it you need, want, and expect from a process that's delivering something to them? And they'll mention a number of things. So actually, after we have this list of items, we ask them to put them in ranked order. Which of these things are most important to you? Which are next most important, and so on. So that's what you're looking at here. The customer in this case is an insurance broker who's selling insurance to a person who needs, in this case, individual and family plan insurance policy. So their most important thing is the health coverage meets my needs. Next most important thing is the cost of the coverage. And then the last thing is, how long is it going to take for me to get this? So our next question, now that we have things in ranked order, is we ask the customer, well, how's the process performing on each of these items? So in this case, the health coverage is pretty darn good. What we're getting here is close to exactly what I want. So we gave it a B+. The cost of the coverage is above average. It's a B. It's good. And then the time to complete and get the coverage, well, geez whiz, this is doing not good at all. So it's an F. And the reason for that is the expectation, which is our next column. We're asking, what does an A look like? What is excellence from your perspective as the customer? So in terms of meeting the needs, it has all the features of the competitors. Cost of coverage, it's equal to or less than competitors. Now in this case, it's equal to or less than the best competitor, which is 5 days. So this was an alarming thing to my client that I worked on. So it was taking twice as long to get the coverage from my client to the competition. So that takes us to our next slide. And now we have a value stream map, and the items that we have in our data boxes is our processing time, lead time, our accuracy measurement, which is our percent complete and accurate, and then what are our batch sizes. So I want to point out some data points here that actually created our big amount of time in this particular situation. Under the first process step, you'll see percent complete and accurate at 55%. Well, what does that mean? 45% of the things coming in, these applications from the broker, have something wrong with them. So this is going to bite us at the third step. And what you can see is the inventory at the third step is 6 days. Those applications are sitting there. So right away, if we could blow that inventory out of there, we would be close to what our best competitor is. So one of the things, and why this is important to have the data, it tells us where to look. It doesn't tell us what the cause of the problem is, but it tells us we need to investigate here. And a problem-solving approach in Lean is very simple. It's called go and see. So the team, we went down there and talked to the folks doing the processing, the application, and we asked them, tell us about your day. And they say, well, they go over to the file cabinet, pull 30 apps, and they proceed to work on them. Well, it's about a 50-50 chance that the first app has something wrong with it. So what do? You get on the phone, you call the broker to call or to talk to the applicant and fix what's missing or incomplete. So this is what's causing our bottleneck right there. Now, one of the things that we have that we think is unique to our consultancy is the use of process design principles. So what would be a process design principle that would apply here? Well, the one that applies is this. If the inputs coming into a step naturally cluster, you create a separate process for each cluster. So what we have are two clusters, apps that are complete and accurate and apps that are not. In the current situation, the apps that are complete and accurate are being penalized by the ones that aren't. So as the person is calling up the broker to track this information down. The complete and accurate apps are waiting. So what we decided to do in our redesign is to create two paths and a triage diamond that would ask, is the application complete and accurate? And if the answer to that is yes, we're going to put these applications on an express lane. Now, another design principle is push decision-making or sign-off down to the lowest reasonable level. So what we had is the person doing this triage, that they would look at the age of the applicant and their health history. And we said to this person, if the applicant is under a certain age and has no history of health problems, you are empowered to grant them insurance. So about 10% of our applicants now are getting insurance in about an hour. Now we have to remember what our total lead time was before. It was 9 to 11 days. Now another thing that we did, the remaining complete and accurate apps went to another person, an underwriter, and this person did a review of folks who were slightly older and also had not much of a health problem, and they would do an approval in about a day. So what we were able to do with knowing where to look with the data, doing a go and see, and then using design principles, we actually ended up beating our competitor. Now, what we're looking at here in our next slide is a value stream map of finding a person, a candidate to fill a position in our organization. And as you can see, we've taken what the processing time is and what the lead time is, and you can see only 1.7% of the total processing and lead time is doing processing work. Holy cow, what's happening here? So what we've done in this is we've exploded the second step, which is the find and select candidate. And what we're doing is doing analysis of each of these steps from a number of perspectives. And the map you're looking at here is, I call a functional activity map. You often hear them called swim lane maps. And we're analyzing each step based on time, quality, waste, and worker frustration. And when we discover issues, what we do is we go to looking for improvement ideas, which we call countermeasures. We don't use the term fix or solve in lean. So the actual vocabulary encourages continuous improvement. And you can see the last three swim lanes here are IT systems, because we want to see how we interact with the IT system. And what are we looking for? Data redundancy, rekeying, reconciliation. We want to bring downstream information needs upstream. We want to share all relevant information. We want to see functionality, ease of use. So what we've got now is our improvement transition plan on slide 28. And we had 11 ideas. We now put them in priority order. And we've got what the performance level target is, what the countermeasure is. We have what's the method that we're going to use and who the owner is. And then at the far right column is what % completion do we have here. So hopefully that gives you a nice overview of value stream mapping, data, analysis, and what an improved process can look like. So I'm going to hand this off to Prakash, and he's going to discuss step 4 of this journey.
Hey, thank you, Dan, and thank you, Hamid. You all had a detailed look at the value stream mapping. We now come to the final step of our journey towards digital transformation. We had alluded that why agility is very important for digital transformation. We'll look at a little more detail on this, on how and why digital transformation needs agility. It helps us to succeed in these transformations. you might be very familiar with waterfall approaches, which are truly applicable for well understood projects which have little variance. You can use waterfall methodologies for repeated implementations that have less uncertainty, sorry. But the digital transformations are always involving new technologies, very high uncertainties. It may be requiring integrating many acquisitions within your organization. You may have to combine requirements. You may have a new customer base. There can be very different expectations from the new sets of customers. So the traditional approaches using waterfall are no longer sufficient to address these kinds of needs. On the right, what you see is what's called a Stacy matrix, a person that came up with this approach, where when you have variance in technology and variance in requirements on the two axes, how what methodology is applicable? When everything is simple, waterfall is probably adequate. When it's very complicated or complex, you need agile transformations, you need agile lean startup transformations required. So that's what we are going to focus more on the upcoming slides. So how do we address the uncertainties in digital transformation? We had talked about the business model canvas earlier. As we proceed through these transformations, we take the information gathered from the customer pain points and the value propositions, and we build incremental solutions to show quick value to our customer. Our team will work with your organizations to put these into practice. We continually engage and listen to the customer. We ensure that your organization does that. We help you build vertical slices of functionality so that you can show those values to the customer very quickly. We learn from the customer feedback to update the requirements and pivot product directions. This also helps us to systematically experiment and apply new technologies. We'll come up with a procedure how to define architecture spikes and infrastructure components to scale development by multiple teams. How do you build an architectural runway and UX runway just in time to reduce wastage and also to avoid unnecessary work for system development? We can also employ some feedback mechanisms how we deploy to the customer by accelerating learning through A/B testing or multivariate testing and all, and our team will help guide your teams to make this happen. In the next slide, we are talking about how to map a value stream into multiple one or more development streams. So this is where we did look at a very detailed example of how to map operational value streams to development, and here is just a sample on how to do that. Once we know and identify the people and the systems that are involved, we realize them into agile release teams for actually implementing the initiatives. Here are a couple of examples of operational value streams that then map into development value streams in here. So this is the example. This is how we will translate your business goals into actual implementations and then take you to the development value streams and then implement the release agile release teams. This is a development value stream canvas that we have developed in the spirit of business model canvas or value proposition canvas. We can populate this information, which is available for the vision of the value stream. How do you translate it and connect it to the implementation? Of course, metrics are very important. We also need to connect how we implement at the agile release team to the portfolio levels. What's important? How do we get them connected? These are all the things we'll talk about. How these connect through a scaled agile framework, and look at how do we do a bottom-up approach of metrics connecting what we actually performed, what we actually achieved into what our goals were initially. It's very important that we scale agile for large digital transformations. As you can see in the left side of the picture, if the teams are not aligned in their goals, if the programs are not aligned in their goals, what we achieve is not going to be successful from a business transformation perspective. Only when they are aligned, then the results will be positive. And this is what we do by working with you through a scaled agile framework in how to align all the multiple teams and their deliverables and get and result in success from digital transformation. This is an example of scaled agile framework applied to lean enterprises. You can see here just the basic essential components from a program and team perspective. You can see where the agile release trains are and how do you connect them to multiple teams, how do you bring things together. We will be working with you very closely in adopting these kinds of scaled agile framework into your environment for a lean enterprise scenario. For large transformations, we do have a framework that applies at the enterprise level. What you can see here are the portfolio management aspects where you get all the budgets allocated to different portfolios, different value streams are identified, and each of these value streams then map to multiple one or more solutions, and each of these solutions may apply to multiple release trains, and each of these release trains may map to multiple teams working to achieve the desired goal. It's one thing to have smaller teams successfully implementing programs. When we have multiple teams, multiple organizations in large enterprises coming, that they need to come together to define a large solution and deliver successfully, we need to have some structure to that framework, and that's what SAFE provides, and we will be working with your teams to achieve these goals. There are a few other success practices that are important in digital transformation. So we'll talk a few of these practices briefly, and then come to the conclusions, summary and conclusions. Engineering practices are very important. We have been working with hundreds of teams in putting these practices in their teams, and these are very important in order to achieve the right results. So we need to, every member of the team needs to be involved in decision making. We need to take the right engineering steps to make it happen. We did talk about the architectural runway. We did talk about some of the engineering steps that need to be taken in terms of coding standards, building quality in, test-driven development, doing continuous integration and deployment. And Agile doesn't mean that we drive the teams crazy. It's sustainable pace is a very important aspect of making sure that the teams are there for the long haul and we can achieve successful transformations. What kind of skill sets are important? Some of the recommendations from an Agile perspective is that we need to have people with broad set of skills. These are called the T-shaped skills. We want to have engineers or people that are in the teams ready to work in various technologies, apply knowledge across different situations, but they do have some deep expertise in some of the areas, and they can implement tough problems. My personal favorite in some of these cases is to have feature-based teams versus component teams, so that every team has something to deliver to the customer, so they always look at the customer viewpoints. We want to make sure that each team member has development and test skills so that they don't defer the problems to somebody else to solve. And one of the important criteria for large enterprises is to keep long-lived teams. Only then they will achieve high performance. And the reward system should match those kind of teams so that they are successful. So here is an example of the safe implementation roadmap. What we can provide as an organization is to provide resources in every one of these areas, including the technology areas, coaches, experts in value stream and process mapping, release train engineers, scrum masters, etc., so that your digital transformation and IT transformation is going to be very successful. In summary, there are two approaches. One is the lean digital enterprise, where you have smaller organizations developing really innovative techniques, innovative products. The other one is the larger digital transformation, where you have larger teams, multiple teams coming together. And there is a nice table to compare and contrast how the agile development in larger teams and the lean startup approach for smaller teams can be applied. And our organization, AgiLeanIT, will be involved in defining and helping you all the way through creating all the different canvases, leading teams through the agile values and principles, scaling agile, and then utilizing all lean principles and methods in every step of the transformation process.
Wonderful.
Hamid, do you want to add anything to the summary conclusion?
Yes. Thank you very much for that, Prakash and Dan. Great discussion. What I want to do is maybe spend the last maybe 5 to 10 minutes we have in just an interactive dialogue about our experiences having worked with clients. And maybe what I'd like to do is to kind of talk to your experience, because you were one of the early adopters at Cisco. You led the overall organization's transformation initiative to bring in these new practices to a very large organization that was at a very dominant position, it still is, and trying to compete more effectively, if you will, with new capabilities and faster time to market. Can you maybe spend a few minutes and talk about some of the challenges that you ran into as you've tried to bring some of these concepts? You know, this was probably back in 2012, 2013, and the ideas of Agile were certainly around. Manifesto came around in the early 2000s, but it wasn't mature yet as it relates to how do you apply it to larger scale enterprises. What was your experience like as you were trying to bring this to a very large engineering team with the combination of hardware and firmware engineers who had to bring these solutions to the table? What was that like? Could you talk about that a bit?
Yeah, actually, very rightly you put in your last sentence, especially where Cisco was always known as a hardware company. And how do you apply all these methodologies for software development and be successful? In fact, Cisco has actually now totally transformed into a software organization. And so that journey from being branded as a hardware company and not knowing how to do software very well, and then adopting Agile and Agile technologies and being successful in software was a big step forward for the company. So we did encounter lots of problems in terms of traditional approaches adopted for hardware was also being applied to software. And hardware has actually a longer lead time and the requirements change less rapidly than software. And so we had to overcome all those barriers in terms of how do you address changing requirements? how do you address uncertain technologies that are coming so fast that how do you accommodate them in building new products in time? These were the challenges that we had faced in making it happen. And we did go through a very successful transformation, and now Cisco has become a software company.
Very interesting points that you highlight. How long was the transformation? How long did it take? I mean, I noticed it's a long journey. Many folks expect very short-term benefits and gains from these kind of initiatives. What was your experience like as you were trying to go through this transformation in the 2012 to 2015? What was the first year like? What was the second year like? If you kind of think about that, what do you remember most about those years?
So initially, I led the transformation in our services organization, which was exclusively software oriented. And so what we did was not to do a big bang transformation. We started with smaller programs. First, we got a few of the programs into agile methodologies and scaled agile, and then we used the same approach to influence other programs and make them be successful as well. So in the end, actually, it took about probably 2 years to transform the whole 2,000 member organization into completely agile and scaled agile. Mm-hmm. And then we applied the same techniques to other business units because entire Cisco-wide transformation kicked off at that time. And we were able to replicate all these successes into other business units as well.
Did you have any challenges trying to connect to a specific business strategy and kind of trying to make sure that those transformation efforts are following the specific, unique differentiation that Cisco has and maintaining its leadership in the industry? How difficult was it to create those connections?
The top-down approach, the topmost approach in terms of portfolio management and all were done a little independent of our transformation. Our transformation mostly focused on generating the right value stream for some of the portfolio items and then building the agile release trains and succeeding in building products. So we did not completely connect the portfolio level to the release trains, but we did somewhere in between.
Very good. And that's really the key point, I think, of our discussion today is to try to create those connections and make them more clear and transparent and visible to senior leadership. Because we find, there's many cases that we internally discuss where there is this demand from leadership, just go be agile, because agile is the thing to do these days and we're falling behind. And many times it falls on the top technology leadership to determine how to best reorganize the functional units and the technology teams, the software teams, the hardware teams, and march in a certain direction. And when you ask them, how exactly does this help to your competitive position in the market, very rarely do you find a clear articulation of how that agile team or that agile trains work actually supports a specific unique position in the market. Was that also your experience at Cisco?
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. This is not an air warfare. Yeah. It's a ground war. We need to be there with the teams, with the organization, every step of the way to lead those organizations in the right way. So it's not just coming in and making a presentation and say, thou shalt do that, do this. Yeah. So we, as you know, from AgiLeanIT, we are going to be there every step of the way with the organization to lead them through the portfolio management, through value stream mapping, through creating agile release teams, and embracing the right agile practices with these organizations.
Excellent. Thank you, Prakash. I also want to ask Dan a couple of questions about his experience. Dan has been involved in helping lots of organizations with the idea of using ideas of lean, process mapping, and good analytical techniques to improve performance. And almost universally, what I hear from our clients when I talk to them is, how can I show a connection between a particular project, IT project or business project, back to the metrics that really matter? So I want to ask Dan, what has been his experience in actually helping the organizations define what those metrics are and how they're actually changing the value proposition to the client in terms of specific outputs that are making a difference in what you do as a business. Could you maybe give us an example of a couple of areas that you think is useful as it relates to value stream mapping and the area of focus that you have?
Well, the data boxes have two chunks of data on them that are important to all customers, and probably in ranked order. When you ask customers what is it you need, want, expect, they're generally going to say some aspect of quality will go into the number one slot. So that's our percent complete and accurate as a data item to capture that. The other thing that they're apt to say, and it generally falls in the number two slot, is some aspect of time. So Lean as a methodology does a phenomenal job of having techniques, methods, tools to greatly improve the numbers on percent complete and accurate. And the other chunk of tools that Lean has are time-based tools and methodologies. So, we're focusing on the two highest ranked data things or data areas that customers are wanting. I want to add some observations from having done this for years. One observation is, and I think IT folks have this assumption that the business knows the business. I would like to challenge that assumption, since most of the time I work with the business, and I'll see a supervisor or somebody slap their forehead and go, "I had no idea we did ... Now, I don't know what your reaction to that is, but my reaction is, what? Yeah. You're the supervisor and you're not exactly certain what the heck, the folks are doing. So the analysis aspect, to me, is so critical, because if you do your analysis correctly, the countermeasures are easy to come up with. And so, for all the IT folks out there, I would just, mention that, the business may not know the business as well as you think they do.
Yeah, very good point. And also, I want to connect what you just said to the idea of business performance. Let's talk about increased sales or customer retention, or having a different view as to how success is measured. Can we link these ideas that are very lean oriented about removing waste to deliver value, obviously, and actually talk about how it actually has impacted sales? Is that possible to your mind?
For sure. Yeah. Absolutely. Here's a public sector example. It's actually, so it's not sales driven, but it's actually customer satisfaction driven.
Yeah.
My first public sector process redesign was for the City of San Jose Public Works Department, and it was permits for developers, and it was taking over a month to get these permits. We got it down to 5 days. And something that I regret now is I didn't get copies of the letters that we got from the developers saying, "Holy mackerel, what have you done?
Right.
This is the best thing ever." So, actually, there was another example. I won't name the client's name, but it was a request for proposal, and this led directly to increased sales because we enhanced how quickly the request for proposal got out, and secondly, it was tailored to each customer. So the number of proposals that were accepted went up. So that's directly related to revenue.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much. This has been a great discussion, and let me go ahead and actually go to our Q&A section of our discussion. We wanted to make sure that we have an opportunity to hear back from the attendees who actually have joined us this morning. So let me ask Stephanie, are there any questions that we can start to take and maybe address over the next few minutes?
Sure. Actually, we've gotten a lot of questions, but I'll give you guys the top three if because of the time we have left.
Okay.
The first question, are there different levels of detail for value stream maps? If so, what are they?
Yes, the first answer is yes. And it basically, we start at the high level. I like to call it macro. And it's basically what are the major steps in a value stream. And sometimes I kind of put an arbitrary number on this. When I'm teaching classes, I tell the class no more than 7 steps. And sometimes I say, okay, I'll break that rule and you can add a couple more. But, I try to keep people at the high level. Now, seldom in my career are we able to identify a problem at that level from looking at the high-level value stream map. It's at that second level that I had an example of there, which I call functional activity, also known as swim lane maps, is really where we start seeing issues clearly. And then once in a while, we have to really get into the weeds, which is breaking down a process task. It's the work of one person, and the technique for that is a job breakdown.
So, excellent. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Did you go ahead?
Yeah, so I think
you have
we're ready
something to
for
add,
the next Yep.
Oh, okay. Sure. Great. You spoke highly of adopting Agile for digital transformation. How does Agile development differ from the traditional waterfall methodology?
Okay. Great. Prakash, you want to speak to that a little bit?
Yeah. So as we saw, agile development is required when there are technology uncertainties and requirements uncertainties. Where if those uncertainties are not there in our transformation, waterfall will serve well as well. Actually, I do have a small slide that compares agile versus waterfall in various aspects. If you see the slide, I have a slide that talks about the commitment and delivery. In agile, what we are trying to do is to organize to reduce the cost of change, because change is inevitable in the way we function. So we want to make sure that we can incorporate changes as quickly as possible. Whereas in waterfall approach, you review all the artifacts, you approve all the artifacts, and make sure that the changes are very costly so that there are no changes. You are sticking to a plan. In Agile, we want to balance between the value delivery now and the future ability. You don't end up building all sorts of infrastructure first and then start building some value. You want to keep on building value as you go on. Whereas in waterfall, the scope is fixed. Your cost, schedule, everything varies based on the factors, right? We want to deliver frequently on cadence. So the scope varies and quality is very important in Agile. Whereas in waterfall, deadline is very important. You want to make a commitment very early in the program when it starts and then deliver it on time, regardless of any uncertainties of technology, regardless of any changes in requirements that come. And if it's a long project, the requirements have already changed by the time you deliver, and the project is deemed a failure because you didn't meet all the requirements. In Agile, we want to share that responsibility amongst the team, whereas in waterfall it's more command and control, and the project manager controls what gets done. So there are other comparisons you can see here in terms of decisions and adaptability. How do you track progress? In Agile, it's the actual software that is delivered is the measure of progress. In one of the waterfall projects I'm talking about in the 90s, we had a 1-year program, and we were many large teams were developing things, and every manager presented 10% progress every month. And when we got to the end of the project, we were 90%, and we stayed at 90% because we couldn't increase that anymore. It stayed in that state for another year or so before the project got completed. If you don't have a working software that is the measure of progress, then you can never have what's to project completion. So that's where the biggest difference between how you track a project in Agile versus Waterfall changes. So again,
Great.
there are other factors such as the how you treat individuals, what are the interactions. These are all based on the Agile manifesto values and principles that we use in Agile versus in Waterfall.
Thank you, Prakash.
Thank you.
Stephanie, what is the third question?
The next question is, how do you secure leadership support to document the strategic opportunities in digital strategy development?
Yeah. Excellent. Let me take that one on. This is actually an interesting topic. I get this question quite often from client interactions, whereas they usually want to know, why should I go Agile? I know everybody talks about it. I know everybody wants to do something with it, but why is it? Do I really need it? Do I really need to make this transition? Why is the world so much different than 10 years ago or 15 years ago? So that's a common question. And my answer is just to look at the nature and pace of change around you. We have seen an increase in complexity that has surpassed most people's ability to keep their arms around the trends and the changes that may impact you. We're seeing competitors emerge from all kinds of sub-industries and verticals that you had no expectation to be a competitor there. So you have lots of challenges like that. And what I usually basically highlight is that you need to really make the point to the most senior person in the organization who's responsible for the strategy and the direction of the business. So the key becomes really starting with the influencers. That would be the first thing that I would recommend. Make sure that the folks who have something to say about the direction of the company, the strategy that's being pursued, the business model, are exposed to the ideas. And what challenges can Agile go after? The things that Prakash spoke to in terms of how Agile is more about incremental value delivery. And the fact that we're seeing more and more often projects that were 2 or 3 years, even the shorter projects that we call 2 or 3 year short-term projects, are now being canceled within 6 months to 8 months because all of a sudden, all of the drivers around us started to shift because of a new competitor entering the market. So it is critical to crystallize these ideas and the type of competitive pressures that the organization is under and start to plant the information with the key influencers around the leadership team and the planning teams in an organization and be able to clearly articulate in maybe a 3-minute elevator pitch of why it's important to go down this path and articulate how we want to connect the business strategy and the unique competitive position that the company has into a specific action we're taking with the products and services we have and the projects that we're taking on to deliver changes to that particular value proposition. This is this process that needs to be accelerated. This is something that used to be a 3 to 5 year cycle for almost 80% of the industries. What's happened is that timeline has been shrunk down to less than a year. For some organizations, it's less than 60 days. If you're some of the digital native organizations who are being attacked every day from all sorts of organizations who really have no barrier to entering that marketplace. If I have a platform such as an Amazon or a Force.com, for an organization to enter another part of that digital world is really a small incremental cost. So you're under constant attack. And unless you can organize your functional teams to continuously evaluate these threats and be able to quickly react to them and experiment with ways that you can compete, you will not be able to achieve success. So I would say the answer is start with influencers, put together a 3-minute elevator pitch, and make sure that you eventually present those specific values and capabilities to the leadership, CEO, CIO, as appropriate.
Thank you, Hamid. Prakash, did you have something to add?
No. Just.
Oh, okay. Thank you. So if you're listening to this and still need help or have questions, we invite you to connect with us. You can send an email to us at info@AgileanIT.com. And please feel free to share this webinar recording and slides once we send it out to you with your colleagues. We're happy to help you on your way or answer any questions that you may have regarding AgileANIT transformations.
Yep.
Thank you again for attending the webinar, and we look forward to seeing you on one of our next ones coming up in the future. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Thank you.